This program has been made possible by the generous support of these organizations at Stanford University: Office of the Provost, Institute for International Studies, School of Humanities and Sciences, and Ambassador and Mrs. L. W. Lane, Jr., Donald L. Lucas, the Russell Family Foundation, Ronald P. Spogli. International Environmental Politics was offered to students at Stanford University as part of the International Policy Studies program during Winter Quarter 2001.
World Bank, structural adjustment, projects, debate, and then financing environmental protection more generally. I don't know if we'll get to that. But it seems to me there's two different kinds of interactions. One's our structural adjustment programs, and the other are specific projects. Okay, so, and that we want to try to evaluate both. But let's just first make sure we understand, especially in the former case, what's involved. So what is structural adjustment? Anybody who's spent some time and knows a fair bit more, I'll let somebody else take the lead on this. But what does structural adjustment programs consist of? Anybody? Malika, you want to start?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Structural adjustment is when the World Bank or the IMF comes in and they want the country's credibility up for foreign investment. And so they say, well, privatize state-owned enterprises, reduce your debt.
Okay, so at least one, we'll kind of list some of the things, and we probably won't capture everything here, but one is sort of privatization, right?
So ownership of goods goes to the private sector.
Okay, let's take it slow. So the first thing is privatization in the sense that you have the problem that the World Bank, IMF come in when they say, funny, but you guys can't get loans anymore. Nobody wants to give you money. You got bad credit. Okay, so how do we create a good credit environment so that you can get the capital you need to develop your economy? Right now, you're a poor country. You can't get money to build your economy because everybody thinks you'll just take the money and waste it. Okay, so how do we, that it will be kind of squandered away for various and sundry reasons, and what we're going to do is get rid of those reasons, thereby building up your credibility so that people will lend to you again. We're not, we will also lend some money, but largely we're trying to make it so that we're trying to force you to do things so that others will lend to you. That's at least part of it. So part is privatization. Say, get government out of owning big industries. Okay, so that's one step. Okay.
The next major one would be pay back your debts. Like make that the priority versus other issues you might have.
Okay, prioritize.
Or defense or education or whatever else.
Right. So you've got, just like right now in the U.S. government and in talking about the budget statement by Bush, right? We're talking about how do we decide between whether spending, we've got three ways to spend money. One is don't take it in, otherwise known as a tax cut, right? The second is of the money we're taking in and spend it in two ways. One is on current goods and services of the government, and the third is on past goods and services, right? The goods and services we already bought, but we paid for on a credit card called the debt. So you have to pay off some of that debt in order that the government is more solvent, right? Okay? So prioritize debt payments. Okay? So if you change the proportion of money that's going to current services to pay off old debt more. Okay? What's the third one?
Make your focus on the export market so you can integrate yourself in the world economy.
Okay.
So if you are investing in business or anything, invest in something that you can export.
Okay, export-led growth. What's the logic there? Why is, if you want to grow your economy, why is it better to grow it export-led rather than otherwise?
Because then you are at competitive advantage. You can use your comparative advantage to your advantage.
Okay. So figure out what you're... Get more competition, figure out what you're good at, because presumably what you're good at you make a bigger profit margin on, and therefore So you make more profit on that. Okay, so good. So those are three. Let's see if we can get some others. So let's get some other people in. What are some other things that when the World Bank and IMF come in, they say, first thing, get out of the business of business. Okay, so privatize any corporations that are nationalized currently. Prioritize debt relief. Do export-led growth. Okay. What are some other elements of it?
Deregulate markets.
Okay, so this privatization is kind of coupled with pretty soon if I do more colors I can go out to, I'm doing graffiti out on the walls. Privatization. Deregulation, is that what I said, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, deregulation and sort of let markets work. I mean, it kind of, there's a sort of general thing, right, which is get government out of the economy, right? That is...
Open up trade.
Okay, hold that. Is that Sarah?
Yeah.
Good. So the first is get government out of the economy. Okay, so this is export-led. So make kind of in the negative or cynical way, right? Make your country safe for our imports, right? Open up so that we can sell our stuff to you. We'll tell you that, do export-led growth, and if you can do it well, we'll let your products into our country. But mainly, again, if you want to be cynical about that the World Bank and IMF are just working on behalf of the big donors, which would not be an unreasonable assumption, right? We're giving you money. We want what we get. We want what we pay for here. So open up your economies to imports. Okay, Emily.
It is similar. Open up your countries to allow multinational corporations to establish themselves in this.
Okay, so one is both open up trade both for imports and for capital, right? So let the MNCs come in, rape and pillage, leave, right? Okay, so we want to open up trade as much as possible. What else? Allison.
They devalue their currency so that foreign investors can get more for their money and maybe tempted to come in.
Okay.
They actually usually they ask you to stabilize the currency.
Right. It does. They want you to let in general, they want you to not be managing the exchange rate, right? What that, Allie's right, that essentially what that in most cases means is if you're managing it, you're probably managing it so that you're managing in such a way that getting it to correct requires devaluing it, okay? So essentially, stop managing the exchange rate, right, which generally does mean a devaluation. It would be interesting if there's ever been a case where it didn't. But presumably you're managing your exchange rate to benefit your local actors vis-a-vis foreign actors, and that would mean that you're overvalued, right? You've overvalued your thing. And that just exhausted my total knowledge of exchange rates. I always get confused by how exchange rates work. But okay, so stop managing this exchange rate, let it float, let the market figure out how many pesos there are to the dollar, et cetera. So let that work rather than setting it corporate. Again, just another version of getting government out of the economy, right? Let markets work, okay? Anything else? Other big elements of what's involved in structural adjustment?
Cut subsidies to agriculture.
Okay. Okay. So again, up here is cut subsidies. Right? Opening up being trade here this is kind of reduce tariffs, right? Any other big things we're missing? Yeah, anything else? Yeah, Hanky?
The balancing of fiscal policy, have your budget in order.
Okay, so and again, this is not a class in micro. I couldn't teach it if it was. But this notion of that if you're running a debt, right, or actually a deficit, right? Almost all the countries in the world are running debts. That is, they have borrowed in the past. The question is, are they running a deficit? Are you doing deficit spending where you're spending more, your revenues are greater than your, your expenses are greater than your revenues, right? So you're spending more than you're bringing in from your tax base. And are you printing money, which is driving inflation? All these things kind of can help, if you buy into the underlying logic here, right? All these are based on theories about how economies work, right? About how you make economies grow and what slows economies down and what speeds them up. The notion that government should not be in the business that one way to think of it is that if government is bringing in money and then spending it, that's less efficient than letting corporations take that money and spend it in terms of investing in and producing things. But so just essentially balancing fiscal and budgetary policy in various ways. Okay, that's again, it's a pretty complex set of things you need to do, but you basically don't want to be doing deficit spending. You don't want to be printing money and driving inflation. Those sorts of things, you want to bring that into check. Anything else? Anything in the economy we haven't touched yet by doing a structural adjustment policy? I mean, we kind of now say, well, all we want you to do is fix everything, right? That's what structural adjustment is get it all right at once, right? I mean, and underlying this are things about corruption, a variety of other kind of the sort of more social aspects of structural adjustment. So, just so we know what we're talking about. So now, let's think. So that's sort of structural adjustment policy. What about, just to kind of, and I don't think we need to spend long on this, but so that's one thing. Now, first, just so we also understand that, who calls who when structural adjustment starts? World Bank goes in and says, your economy's screwed up, we're going to fix it, get out of our way. That what happens? No, what happens, Sarah?
Countries request assistance.
Right. So they want help. They may not want the help they can get, but they do want help. Right? They would prefer some other kind of help, perhaps. But, and I mean, in one way, just thinking kind of politically, if you're a government and what's the political advantage of bringing in the World Bank or IMF? Sure.
Well, if you devalue your current currency, you can blame someone else.
You got it.
Kind of thing. If you do all this stuff that's really going to drastically alter the economy, and it's not your fault.
Yeah, right. You're just complying with what the World Bank imposed on you, right? This is what you did in high school when you didn't want to go out with somebody. Oh, my parents say I can't go, right? I mean, you don't want to go, but you blame somebody else for it. This is a nice scapegoating technique, right, for the leaders to say, we don't want this, but we have to do it because that's what the World Bank is saying. Okay, so there's some nice. So one is, but what does that mean with respect to the World Bank?
Popular.
Well, one is going to be unpopular, sure, but I don't think they're trying to necessarily win a popularity contest, right? If so, they're failing miserably. But what else does it do?
We're kind of facing an uphill battle in making their aid work, because if a country doesn't really want to put in the effort necessarily, but feels like they have to, I don't know.
Right. I mean, there's some way that there's kind of this scapegoating also leads to not being committed to it yourself, right? Hey, if you really wanted to do it, why do you need our help? That one part. But the other is it gives some power to the World Bank, right? They have been invited in. This country is in such bad straits that they're saying, please help us. And then that does give the World Bank some power to say, you will help you, but here's the terms, right? And in fact, these are the terms, and a lot of these are not necessarily at this point, everybody knows what's involved, right? If you ask for help, you know what kind of help you're going to get, and it's this flavor, right? But it's still, you still may not like some of it, and some of it still may not be negotiable. So I think part of this is discussed in the articles as this notion of, well, the World Bank think again about the politics. Why would the World Bank like to put out an image that they're just especially this goes to the project level, that they're just technocrats? I mean, so let's think about the project level. What about projects? Who can propose projects and sort of how to project level stuff like, let's say, for example, Three Gorges, right? Or Jalangdi or Narmada or any of the big dam projects. I mean, these are kind of the poster boy for the World Bank screwing things up are all the dam projects, right? So the dam projects, how do those get started? What's the process with dams?
Isn't there a process like the country director? It starts like
within the country, right? That India, when they wanted to build Narmada, right? They say we need money, right? These are big infrastructure projects, billions of dollars, multiple billions of dollars. We need big money. We can't either. I mean, so what's the deal? And here I'm actually not sure what the answer is. So if somebody does know,
the state governments go. I mean,
but are they facing a place where they can't borrow the money at cheap rates?
No.
They can't float their own bonds.
It's easiest to go to the World Bank.
Okay, so that it's easiest. Are the rates tend to be cheaper?
Yeah, and also it's also the World Bank, the country World Bank stuff, and the governments are usually they're very. It's like the same thing. They're
tightly interwoven.
The Indian representative of the World Bank would be like government appointed.
Okay.
So I mean,
they're one and the same person.
They're one and the same person.
Okay. And they're trying to get loans. They're trying to get the money they need without floating their own loans, which they might not be able to do, float their own bonds rather, and also where they can't get it from the private sector at rates that are attractive, at least relative to the World Bank. So the World Bank is giving them some kind of terms that are more attractive. Okay. So they say we need several $billion to start this dam project. So they put together a proposal and go to the World Bank and say, we'd like you to help fund X% of this project. I mean, presumably in most cases, the World Bank is not putting up 100% of the project money, but the government itself has to put up some as just good faith money, right? I would imagine that in most of the cases that's true, right? Okay, so they propose a project, and then it gets reviewed by the bank, which then decides to fund it or not, right, with some set of conditions. Again, they're asking for help. Presumably, they're not going to the World Bank because they're going because it's a favorable set of terms, but those terms aren't fully defined yet. The terms of what the payback rate is, what the interest on the loan is clear, but the other terms that go along with the loan are not yet clear, and are negotiated through this process of negotiating what the project looks like, right? Okay, but again, what's the World Bank's main mandate? Protecting the environment? What's their main mandate? What are they supposed to do? Why were they created? Promote development, right? So this stuff, the structural adjustment started about development, right? When you're screwing up and you can't get there, here's how you should do it, right? And the projects themselves are sort of the more micro level version of that, of saying, hey, you want to develop, before you can run all these now newly privatized industries, you need some electricity, so let's put in a dam and flood thousands of acres and displace a bunch of people, right? I mean, you need some kind of power generation, right? So that's why dams. And you also, development, it's hard to develop in Bangladesh when, 2 months out of every year, X% of your land is underwater. It makes it harder to run a business that way, right? So we can do flood control, a bunch of other things. So dams are one way. And you could look at the World Bank page to see what are the other kinds of projects that they're doing. They also do other projects. But the dams are the one that we see a lot of. Okay, so those are sort of two different elements of it. Debate. So who wants to say, okay, so why don't the guys who are on the pro side, right, who work for the World Bank, right, and we read some stuff by people, like the tri-authored thing, I forget the names. What was it? Cruz, Munising, and Warford presumably work for the World Bank, right? They're the ones who are describing these different projects. So I'm not positive about that, though. But in any event, so what's the argument that the World Bank is doing good stuff? That here's a good thing. Kari.
The idea that it gives some sort of structure and it does have funding to fund, and can analyze projects, create the best way to do that project, and it has the money to implement that project as well.
Okay. So, in fact, I'm going to try to let this work as a debate for a while, so don't be talking to me. You guys go around, a few of you go around and say why the World Bank is doing good things, why structural adjustment. Why don't we talk about, you can talk about both structural adjustment and projects, and why they're good things. And then after a little bit, you guys can start jumping in and saying, wait a minute, what about this? And then you respond. So.
I have a question. Is this a debate about whether the World Bank's good, whether the programs are good, or is it whether they're good for the world, or is it whether they're good for the environment?
Good for the environment.
I think that there's a different
thing
we haven't talked about yet, really.
Okay. Well, okay. So why don't you lead with that? Why don't you lead with why it's good for both?
Okay.
because that's what the debate is about, right? One is that it's good for the World Bank wants to promote the idea that they're good for the world, good for these countries that are receiving the aid, and good for the environment too, right?
Yeah, I think you can make the case. Well, I think you can make the case both ways, as far as it's good for the environment, but it's bad. But maybe what they're doing that's good for the environment is bad for the world, or both. But
okay.
I just wanted to, I guess, bring out the notion that because these countries are requesting assistance with specific things, then the World Bank is in like a position of power, like, oh, well, we'll give you this money if they can apply certain conditions to the countries, and that those conditions can be improving environmental improvements, whatever.
Okay.
And also, like, if they're going to implement an industry, like, okay, this has to be a clean industry, or this has to be, like, you have to clean up this river if we're going to do something with it, or, like, they're in a position to protect the environment and create incentives to protect the environment, to force them to comply, basically, where they might not have.
Along that same lines, the World Bank is controlled indirectly by the role of NGOs and the civil society, and so they can implement that sort of environmental ethic in countries where there might not be such a civil or democratic uprising or power.
They can collect on a broad base of knowledge as well. It's a worldwide group, so they can have a large pool of resources for information.
And through economic growth, they can lower the poverty rate, so that maybe the people won't exploit so many of the natural resources.
Okay. So decrease poverty rate. What, Kari, what was yours? I didn't catch yours.
That they create a information base, or like that they have that they're on the global level, so they have a lot more information than a single nation on how to solve problems.
I think another big point of the World Bank is to establish macroeconomic stability, and if you have a more stable country, you're going to have a better concern for the environment.
How does that argument work? That is what you guys should be asking. Is wait a minute.
If you have a country that's in shambles, if people are fighting and having wars, I mean, war is one of the highest things that destroys the environment. And then also along with that, if you have export-led growth or privatization of industries, and people complain that they focus on natural resources, but if they have nothing else to export, like I think if you let them have a little bit of growth, then they can diversify their exports.
Okay. So export-led growth does what? Just make sure I get it down right. How is it? I'm sorry, quite.
If you have export-led growth, then you can eventually diversify your exports, and so you're not so reliant on natural resources.
Okay.
Because it's fairly public. Like there's that. I was actually going to ask about this. Like, how public is their information? Because it seemed like on one argument was saying it was fairly public, and then another one was saying that basically the directors couldn't even get at it, and then they were also saying that the U.S. was making everything public, but Europe was arguing against that.
Well, aren't things public now? Like, where's
You're supposed to be Env'l, so given that your last name is a W, I would say that's not perhaps the argument you want to make.
Okay. What she said.
I think
other people jump in. I mean, we're getting pretty far down the list here of why the World Bank is the best thing since sliced bread.
Shoot us down.
I just have a comment on.
And there's no need to be polite here. So at this point, start jumping in and.
The whole diversifying of exports is like, as an economy goes, I think the whole point of like comparative advantage is that the developing countries are going to start exporting what they're comparatively have a comparative advantage in, and that's like natural resources and cheap labor.
But if you don't have any kind of, people that have education or any kind of a technological transfer that happens when you have privatization, leapfrogging, like, how is it ever going to change? Like, eventually you don't want someone to be focusing on their natural resources, and if they have policies of import substitution, like, that's not going to happen.
It's already natural resource based.
It's policy.
That's not much of a debate if you just let her say your part. Jeez and Pete.
Well, I think it's one of those things where on paper those ideas are very compatible, but I think it's been proven through much more case studies and like project impacts over the years that those that export dependence, like for your GNP, that just kind of can destroy your agricultural base. I mean, there's no attempt by the World Bank to put economic development and like environmentally sound behaviors hand in hand. Like, I would even have to question how possible those two goals really are in the way that the World Bank is just so economically heavy. Like, I mean, they're trying to change markets, they're trying to stimulate all of this growth and put all of this money into it, but where it ends up going, it doesn't really all add up in the end.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. A lot of the pro people over here were saying, the World Bank can do this, it can do this, it can do this, but the point is that it hasn't really done a lot of those things. I mean, the World Bank has the power to, promote environmental protection, but even when it's pretended to do that, a lot of it has been kind of just rhetoric. I mean, in some of the readings that it hasn't gone beyond really establishing a bunch of bureaucrats that don't really do anything, and that especially with an institution like the World Bank, where you don't really have that much accountability. I mean, you're not voting for the heads or the leaders of the World Bank. No one's really responsible. You can have some NGO pressure, but the World Bank isn't responsible to the NGOs. I mean, they're responsible to their member states, basically. And I mean, not all NGOs don't represent what the members really want a lot of the time. I mean, they can try to put pressure on those member states, but they can only do so much, and that the power is so disproportionate, and that the World Bank so far hasn't used their power in a way to promote environmental protection. I mean, it can, but it hasn't.
Just a large bureaucracy whose environmental department is there just for window dressing.
But the one thing you have to realize also is that it's been developing. Like, it is basically, it started out as sort of an economic structure. However, there was a point in which people in the World Bank realized that change had to occur, that they had to start having environmental administration. That's when the whole bureaucracy, when all the they said 60 new environmentalists were added, and like initially it was completely ridiculous. Like, people weren't getting information across, it was back and forth, but it's the beginning of something, and they started focusing on things the World Bank had already implemented. They started focusing on future environmental problems that might come up. Like, none of that was happening before. They were just implementing without even considering the environment. It just hadn't even sort of been an issue, but now at least that's getting focused on.
No, it's a great start, but I don't see it as developing into anything more than that. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, now we've done our environmental stuff, we have this bureaucracy set up, so we don't have to listen to NGOs anymore because we got our environmental protection down.
Well, there is the case in the Political Economy Environmental Adjustment, that paper. It's by the Dubash and Seymour, where they talked about the forest sector and stuff. And the very first example, basically case study in Papua New Guinea, talked about how the World Bank did like hold its own and say, well, no, you really do need to have this environmental protection measure. This is my understanding. Environmental protection measure, even though they were getting lots of pressure to sort of drop it and just go on with the whole thing, but they really did hold their ground and say, and then the people basically say that that's sort of what the World Bank needs to do if they're going to be credible and.
I think the World Bank is really destructive when it does take over environmental issues, because I wrote a paper last year on, I got really lucky and found some original documents from the World Bank, like letters to and from, and there was an inspection panel sent into this forest area in India that was protected by the World Bank and the government, the GEF. And
the Global Environment Facility, which is now run largely by the World Bank, administered by the World Bank, and works for several different projects, but including the financial mechanisms for the Climate Change Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, and the Montreal Protocol.
Right. So they've given a lot of money to preserve this, a huge area of tropical forests. But the thing is, the NGOs around there agitated because the World Bank money coming in was taken by the Indian government and just turned into, logging increased and a lot of other stuff, and they were relying on the Indian government for data. So, obviously the data was being greenwashed or whatever you call it. And the World Bank sent in an inspection panel because that's one of their operational directives they've changed. For environmental protection. They're supposed to be more environmentally oriented now. And the inspection panel was made out of, composed of independent academics, like sociologists who interviewed people, biologists, environmentalists, a really prestigious panel. And they went in and they looked, and the World Bank has like 32 operational directives, and they found that most had been violated in this project, and the project had been going for 2-3 years. And they recommended, withdraw this project, and they sent it back. And the inspection panel has only been sent out like 10 times. So it's only in the worst case scenarios it's actually been sent out. And I had letters from James Wolfenson and like internal memos and stuff. And basically, I have no idea what their logic was. It was completely illogical, but they were just like refute, 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 refute. The inspection panel made out of all these really. Smart men and women, they're wrong, and the project can go ahead, because I guess the Indian government is putting pressure on them not to lose that funding, because, they wanted the funds were mostly used to like buy jeeps and guns, so the forest could be protected, but it was used more to like harass harass NGOs and tribal villagers who were like trying to protect the forest. So. I'm just saying, like, the rhetoric versus reality is, and this
I'm
was
just sort of wondering, like, how
year.
How much of this sort of got lost in the sort of bureaucracy of the organization, which you can't if it's one or two people or like situation, like it's something that you have to work on and remedy in the future. You have to create more checks and balances, but at the same time, does that make the entire administration?
It's just that I don't think the core administration cares, or they're
or did it
still
even get to them?
No, the thing is, if it was a minor issue and it just the World Bank middle management sort of ignored it and were too lazy to address it, that's fine. This went all the way to James Wolfenson, who's the president of the World Bank. And he, personally signed and reviewed this. And the inspection panel, there are thousands of cases against the World Bank. In the last couple of years, only 10 people have been sent, inspection panels have been sent out. So it's only really, it's very few things that get up there to the inspection panel level, because it takes a lot of time and effort to go out there. And the inspection panel was completely overturned. But the World Bank is, their official stuff says, we sent in an inspection panel and we decided that, they didn't say, oh, by the way, the inspection panel, and the inspection panel said this funding should be withdrawn. Like, the GEF has no business protecting forests in this area.
And in general, that's just kind of a scary thought that basically your right hand doesn't know what your left hand is doing. I think there's been countless examples where the board of directors had no idea what was really going on in the country. They couldn't get the access to the operations plans. I think the NGO networks have been actually much more informative than the bank staff has been in keeping people updated with what's going on in the countries and if people are being displaced. So that's a little scary right there. And also with your environmental department, how much power does the department have? If the environmental department all of a sudden says, you know what, this project in Malaysia is not environmentally friendly, you should really consider, you know,
Like
not implementing it.
I agree.
Besides writing a formal, you know, report, is that going to make any difference with the board of directors? And remember, you guys still are a bank. You know, you're trying to like move your assets, move your money. So, are you really going to want to freeze all of a sudden because the project's just not working out on all levels? Probably not.
Well, no, I agree with you in the sense that it is like we are focusing on tons of different problems, but I defer to my comrades.
Doesn't like leave Kari out here hanging out to dry.
I think the World Bank is realizing more and more that they need to be more accountable for things like that, like for the decisions that they make, like that they need to be, like that they're going through a lot of changes, that there's like public release of product information documents and review processes and stuff. And maybe when people like Malika write papers about, you know, and expose these kind of problems, then that's good because they'll learn from their mistakes and be like, oh, we have to like be accountable for this, and like really realize, well, you know, okay, that was probably not a good idea.
See, it is a global organization, and obviously that's going to lead to situations where it goes in and they'll, you know, there'll be cultural differences or things like that, but at the same time it brings in a whole huge global perspective that hopefully will be more positive and have a more positive effect.
I think it can also have a negative effect in the sense that the whole structural transformation thing, like, it's so broad, and they try to apply it to native cultures and things, you know, in areas where it's not necessarily the most appropriate technology and the most appropriate means of officiating development that's productive. And I think, like, the whole thing about structural transformation is that it takes a lot of money out of things like agriculture and primitive means of making income, and they put it into industrialization, and then they don't follow through with it enough, and industrialization becomes a process of degrading the environment and taking money out of like sustainable agriculture. Instead of putting into developing sustainable agriculture, they put it into industrial development, which ends up destroying the environment more because they don't follow through with effective means of doing that.
Isn't each project by the World Bank, they send in like a bunch of people to sort of figure out what should be done, right? I mean, it's originally proposed by the country, but they do send in project managers. So you have all these things that haven't necessarily worked out, but like, I don't have any documentation for it, but what about, there have to be some successes as well. Like, everyone's focus is on what didn't work out, but that's like, yeah, I mean, people make mistakes. Like, you have a whole team of project managers, but like for every little mistake, there must have been.
Yeah, I'm sure there's success, but I think one of the main problems is in the fact that, you know, like you said, they're focusing so much on income growth and, you know, reducing poverty and economic growth that the process that they take to lead a country into that, it destroys, you know, it destroys the environment. It takes a lot of money out of places where it should be put
But
in
what
instead.
about the counterfactual? What's the country going to do on its own? Like, okay, for example, you've got. I mean, wouldn't you rather have a country figure out how to create power in a clean way first, even if it creates sort of an initial like rise and how then if they went through the slow way, went through all the coal burning, went through all of that sort of process, kind of like it's good that we can fund that sort of leapfrogging, like we were saying earlier.
But I guess the question is, does it do that in a clean way? You know, if its main objective is economic
Because basically
growth.
it seems like your argument is that we should just sort of leave them back there in the dark ages.
No, I think
like,
that they should
figure it out themselves.
No, I think that they should tailor development projects to individual countries, which may not necessarily involve, you know, dropping all agriculture and primitive sources of income growth, and then, you know, focusing entirely on industrialization.
But has there been an example of a case, but like a project that's just gone in and done that hasn't taken into account like the other factors as well? Do you guys have an exact case?
I'm sorry, what were you asking?
I'm just asking for like a specific case where we've like just gone in.
Where the World Bank's gone in and
where we just gone in, like
screw
the environment, like all we're gonna focus on is like, and if screw like all the people sort of sitting around in their huts, we're gonna mow it all down.
The dams are like
this is a bad idea.
And I agree with your side, as in the World Bank projects have been very successful in developing countries, but they've been successful for the elite in developing countries. Like, you know, you have all these engineering companies who suddenly have a lot of work, and industrialists who were from rich families to begin with, who are now, you know, super rich because they own automobile factories and, you know, name it, and funded by the World Bank. And it's just that the 90% of the country is at a worse stage because, you know, I mean, first they're indebted. Politicians just take on these World Bank loans, and then all that money is taken and put into dams and these big projects that benefit cities, and the villagers are paying the taxes to fund that, and at the same time they're getting flooded out of their houses, given a dam, and it's just you know. That's one example.
One of the goals of the World Bank is to renegotiate debt, and it's not trying to like get these third world countries to take these loans and like become indebted to them. Like, it's trying to help people. Right. So to say that these projects, like, I mean, if you have like structural adjustment, if you increase the amount of roads, like that's going to improve the quality of living for a lot of people.
Well, and there's going to be a trickle down effect of some sort. Like, you've got to. Like, and long term, it's going to work out.
Like, the World Bank funded the road that goes into the Amazon forest. Like, the Amazon forest started decreasing from the outside in, and then suddenly the World Bank funded this road that cuts the Pan-Amazon Highway or whatever it is. It cuts in through the World Bank, through the Amazon. And suddenly that's why you can access all these trees in the middle of the Amazon, because you can log them, cut them down.
But I mean, like, obviously that's a worst case scenario. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
a lot
yeah,
of times
but it looks really good.
It's a worst case scenario for like an industrialized country, but putting a road somewhere, basically that's helping someone who already has a means of transportation.
Right.
I think you're like assuming a certain level of affluence, of, you know, independence. So I mean, you're coming in with like this industrialized view of already what you want to see, and not really accurately seeing what's already there, and then saying how can we build from. People have complained, say, with the Sarovar, the project dam in India, that the whole point of building that dam was to alleviate droughts and to help build electricity. But who was going to get the electricity and who was going to get the water and irrigation from that dam? A lot of the local NGOs complained that it was going to be the sugarcane industry and basically all the other people that could already benefit from the water. Like, the water was not really going to.
What about the people working at the sugarcane? Like, what if it becomes like a stronger industry and more people have jobs? What about them? Don't they benefit too?
But you could say that, but then that brings it back around. If you have more people working in this area, are you then going to, you know, take into account you have a denser population? Are you ready to handle like more impact upon a smaller area of land? And is that going to benefit the environment? I mean, as opposed to having, you know, these rural spreads of people that are taking care of themselves and the land is not being overused.
But you have to remember also that we're getting asked by a nation to come in and help them out.
You are, but then you dictate what the terms of help are, because it's your money. That's the whole thing.
But I think that what's happening now isn't rural spreads of people. I mean, this is totally like country specific and everything too. You know, like generalizing, but in a lot of countries, it's a lot of people that aren't making it, like people that are not, you know, providing for themselves enough, you know, and that there's a major like our society's kind of going towards like, well, you know what, in order to get food, you need money, and so like there's this big problem with like jobs and stuff like that. That's like one thing, but the other thing is. A lot of developing countries, it seems like, is generalizing again, but what they want to do is, I mean, like, sort of how they're surviving, or maybe what they'd rather do is not, their priorities aren't really with the environment. They're more with, like, creating jobs in industry and getting ahead and developing and stuff, and, like, a lot of that's at the expense of the environment, and they don't really want to have to get more and more they're realizing, well, like sustainability might be a good thing. But anyway, I think that the World Bank helps like helps them take into consideration, like helps them prioritize a little more, like allows them to be able to take into the environment by giving money to do this, like in setting conditions that say, well, you're gonna have to think long term here and put in environmental measures and stuff. Whereas, because it's not like the people in the Amazon wanted to protect, and a lot of, you know, maybe this isn't true, but they want to like be able to cut down the forest to use it. You know what I mean? Like most likely they have.
The other thing is you've got these problems in like you've got these problems in industrialized areas, and they're just going to spread out. Like half the problem. Okay, so we leave the people in the Amazon to, you know, do their past way of life. But the thing about it is you've got these farmers, and they're pushing in on the rainforest, and they're having to cut it down because you've got some sort of industrial center which is expanding. You've got to figure out what to do with that industrial center, and if measures have to be taken to control that, like it's going to affect other. If you just leave it as it is, that's going to continue growing, and then the people who are living with nature are just going to have to continue messing up nature as they've done, as it's already started.
Let's get a couple if you want a couple last comments, and then we'll cut it off.
I wanted to say that in the past, I mean, we're talking about how the World Bank as an institution is learning, and like the first thing that it did was to create this I forget what the I don't know what it's called, but it's where they had this act where, you know, they take into account who's going to be
relocated.
Why can I not think? Yeah, relocated, and that, you know, they're going to ensure that they're getting an equal quality of life or better, and they pulled out of the Three Gorges Dam in China. So I feel like we're on the right track.
We learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, but I mean, how many thousands of people have to be victims of your mistakes? Like, is there...
They asked us to be victims of a mistake.
But I mean, in the end, no, there's no like perfect solution. I mean, there's no way that you can progress without having some side effects that you might say, oops, you know. That's not really what we wanted to happen. But is there any measure of the World Bank to like really review each case and say, you know, if we could have done that again, what could we have done better? Instead, it just kind of plods along, and it's like, well, you know, that was that country. This is the next country. Sorry.
No, but how can you say that? Because like, look at the example of the Environmental Committee. Like, we didn't have one of those to start with. We definitely are developing.
But my question was, so what does it do? I mean, it's a committee, and it sits there.
And I think it's much more dangerous than the World Bank is green now, because it gives us this very destructive facade to it. If you go to the World Bank website, there's all this, you know, oh, we're so green, little banners running around, and and you know, I mean, they have like environment in every single phrase, you know, like the Global Environmental Fund and this and that. But these things tend to be, I mean, they're hijacked by interest in the developing countries, but you know, and two, they're really destructive. So, but people are not, just like the World Bank before, like their thing was, oh, we're alleviating poverty. They did nothing to alleviate poverty. They pretty much increased it in every single case. But and this, I think that's the danger. Like if you have sort of a green face on and nothing to back it up.
I think that, I mean, I'm not going to say that, you know, the World Bank doesn't have its problems, because like obviously it does. But I think the whole point of the World Bank is kind of to address the overwhelming problems that cause environmental problems, like poverty, and that these things like are more kind of, the root of the World Bank is economic development, and I think development will in the end help the environment. But along the way,
in the industrialized world.
See, you have the luxury. You have the luxury of knowing, of like having awareness that like there are problems, and like, you know, last week we had this woman who was talking about sustainable development, and she had this factory in China, and it was like billowing like black smoke out into these people, and they didn't care because they were happy that they had jobs and that they had McDonald's. Do you know what I mean? And it's like you have a luxury in feeling that like something is wrong, And I think that a lot of the world does not have that. And I think that the World Bank, although it is ambiguous as to whether or not they have helped poverty. So,
and it's not. And part of what, and like continuing on what she's saying, is she's saying, okay, I mean, that's just the causal thing. It's like pretty soon, I mean, the people that are living in the next to the smokestack factory are going to have a level of income where they can afford to say, hey, you know what? I'm sick of breathing black smoke. And you know what I mean? Like once your income rises, your concern of the environment rises in a lot of cases. And I think that's sort of where it's going. It's like eventually development will help the environment, and that's sort of
Eli, last word.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay, I guess just to address what you're saying right there, like a lot of what the studies have been dealing with now is like the whole environmental Kuznets curve really only affects sort of local environmental quality. You know, and so as you develop, yeah, they're going to stop like the really polluting black smoke that, you know, is in their backyard, but they're going to start increasing their CO2 like outputs, cars, everything like that. And so like global environmental quality is going to start degrading, even if like local environmental quality is increasing. And then my other question was about the World Bank and the Three Gorges dams. Like, it's sort of a counterfactual. It's like, I think, you know, they pulled out because, not because like I don't think they wanted to, but because I feel like there's so much, you know, public like resentment about it. And so had this project not been as publicized or as like vocally opposed, I still think the World Bank would be in it, and I still think it's a bad project in general.
Good, very good debate. And I think it was nice to have people on the kind of pro side of the World Bank actually defending it, because I think you brought up some really good, we won't go into what your real views are on this issue, but it's nice. I think it's good for those of you who would have tended to come into it thinking of the World Bank as a bad thing, to force yourself to see either if you're on that side or to listen to the other side. And I think they made some really good arguments here about what the World Bank is. And I think the biggest one, and I think this goes to the core of the class, is the difference between, you know, to put it most simply, the pro is effectiveness is counterfactual, right? Better than what would have happened otherwise. The con is effectiveness as goal achievement. No, the environment continues to get screwed. Yes, the environment is better than it would be. And that, I think in a lot of cases, that's the social process that's going on. That those that you need gadflies, you need the NGOs to say, no, you're not achieving it. And you want them not only to be gadflies and say you're screwing it up, but to actually keep moving the goalposts on you. You know, that kind of from a broad perspective, you actually want people doing that, who are constantly saying, no, you're not doing a good enough job. You want people pushing that, you know, so, and then once you achieve, you know, it's like with a coach, right? You want somebody to push you to run a 6-minute mile, and then once you get to a 6-minute mile, you want them to push you to run in 5.5, and then after 5.5, a 5. You want people to move the goalpost so you can get better at it. On the other hand, the coach simultaneously also has to say, hey, you're doing better. You know, you used to be running 7-minute miles, and now you're running 6, and you should feel good about that. And I don't think that there's this constant tension going back and forth, you know, I think between these kind of different social roles. And so, you know, the role of advocates and the role of people who are analyzing and saying, no, we're doing better than we would have otherwise, and yes, we have to keep doing more. So I think that's sort of, in general, what you get here. I want to then go on to saying, okay, so I think there are two questions or two ways to think about it is, one is it, like it goes back to, I mean, some of the other talks we've had recently. One is the environment development relationship. Is that an inherent contradiction? Is that like, no, you get A or B, but not both at the same time? And, you know, and B, if not, what about the World Bank itself? Is the mandate of the World Bank as a development organization, can you change that mandate? Or do we end up with just, you know, that the top officials still are more, you know, according to, you know, sort of the argument Malika was making, you know, the top officials still care only about development, and they're just doing window dressing. They, you know, the kind of, I mean, I think Eli's point at the end, right, does the World Bank get credit for things that other people forced it to do? Well, the NGOs should get credit for that. That they forced them to give up on Three Gorges, and the World Bank doesn't say you forced me to do it, and now I take credit for having done it. No, that credit goes to the NGOs for having got them out of. They're completely out of the Three Gorges now. Is that the case? They've completely turned down. Okay, great. But again, the question there. I think that raises the counterfactual, right? Which is the issue of. Yes, the World Bank has power, but it doesn't have power to stop Three Gorges. Three Gorges are going to go forward, with or without the World Bank money. And the question is, which Three Gorges do you want? The one we're going to have now, or the one we would have had with the World Bank involved? Because the World Bank did learn in developing Three Gorges, however bad the plan was, it was better than the plan that was for Narmada, 15, 20 years ago, right? So it's a better plan, and the question is do you make which is not to say a good plan necessarily, but to say better than it would have been in the Narmada case, and better than probably what's going to go through with the Three Gorges as it is. And that's, I think, a trade-off you need to, kind of think about, right? But so let's talk about that kind of in general. Go back to this notions of questions of whether, is this growth, that kind of, this growth and development, is it fundamentally at odds with environmental protection? Or is it, Henke, I thought, made a good argument, of saying, if you get this, going, that if you get, kind of, as you decrease the poverty rate, as you grow your economy, people will care more about the environment. Did you even believe it, Henke? Do you believe that that's really true, or were you just saying that for the sake of argument?
I think it's mostly true.
You do? Okay.
Yeah.
How many people think that, you can have, that growth is a good thing on average? With all its problems, that growth helps. A good thing from the environmental, obviously, we would like people to have more money and better lives, but the question is, what is the environmental impacts? And, okay, so a fair bit of people think that it's a good thing. Okay? Eli?
What I was going to say is, I think it's good. I think when you grow, you're going to be destroying the environment anyway, and so I feel like by growing slow, maybe you're going to be destroying more of the environment because it's going to take longer to get a certain space, and so people are going to, they might be using up a smaller portion over a longer period of time than a larger portion over a smaller period of time. Does that make any sense?
A larger portion of what?
Say environmental resources.
So say it again?
So say it again.
Okay. Sorry. I'm saying if by growing slowly, maybe they're going to be depleting their resources in a less sustainable way. Even though they're taking up a smaller portion of those resources, it's going to take a longer period of time to grow, as compared to helping an economy grow where, yeah, they're going to be starting to take out their environmental resources a lot faster, yet they're going to reach a level where they don't need to rely on those sooner.
Okay, so one way to think, and there's a way to think about some of these things in general is to think about, at least one way to think about what Eli was just saying is you've got two development paths, right, which are using some amount of resources. One is a fast development path, which is how much resources do you use? Well, a fast development path says you increase the use of resources quickly, you hit some point on the Kuznets curve, right? Environmental concern changes, efficiency changes, you get to do things faster, and you come down like that, right? The alternative path, so he's saying, hold on, just to say, I'll let you contradict it yet, but so he's saying what we care about is the area under the curve. This is total resources used, right? This is just the, and he's saying that the slow development path might be something more like that, right? And that the total area under this curve over the same period of time, it's much greater. It's a theoretical claim, right? That we'd have to test empirically what do development growth paths look like. It's hard to imagine what's this metric here, right? What are we measuring here that we can measure, all resources used? What does that mean? But Emily, no, go. You're so excited.
Well, it goes back to this point earlier about local versus global environment, because I think that actually that black graph would just keep going up, and just the area would be in a different country. It would just be using, Malaysia's hardwoods instead of Brazil's, instead of its own countries. So the consumption and the use of natural resources continues, and it actually is just going up. it's not stopping.
So that we displace environmental problems. The reason why the peninsula has so much green space, right, open space preserves all over the hills here, is because we're getting our lumber from Malaysia and Indonesia and Oregon or wherever else it might be, right?
Coal burning electricity from other states, because California doesn't want to burn coal, but hey, we'll take ours from Nevada.
Right. So our footprint is much broader and bigger, but we don't see it. We're not in touch with what the kind of all of the kind of tentacles of our behavior that go out, and that we don't see where the damage is being done. So I mean, there's two kinds of things. One is a sort of displacement of an environmental environmental effect to somewhere else, creating a local problem, but not that the consumer is aware of in a sense. And the other is creating these more global problems, which are a sense of, we clean up the local air, but we have global warming. So we get rid of the sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, which tend to be local or regional problems. But the CO2, which CO2 is fine, we can breathe that in and out all day long. It doesn't create smog, but tends to melt glaciers and add to sea level rise and other bad things, just more globally. So we clean up. We don't foul our own nest, but we burn down the tree or whatever the analogy would be, right?
And I guess what I was trying to say is I think the optimal path would be sustainable growth, but if you're going to have to decide between World Bank or no World Bank, that's what I would say. I mean, I think the optimal solution is somewhere in the middle, where you do have sustainable local growth. So maybe in between those two.
Right. Just to be cynical about it, there's this part which, if you're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, you might as well be comfortable as you're going down, right? I mean, if we're going to destroy the world, it might as well get it a little bit right on the way. Okay, Miranda.
Well, yeah, I think you're saying the goal is somewhere in the middle. I think the goal is somewhere far ahead. I mean, I think it's a very progressive idea in general, coupling economic growth and environmental growth and sustainable development. I mean, we haven't gotten it right yet,
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of model is being propagated from us to all these other countries that's not really the best model yet? I don't think anyone is really trying to think progressively and proactively instead of reactively. We're just kind of going and saying, well, this is what worked for us, but I guess it worked, but we're still struggling too. So, I mean, eventually on that curve, sure, their environmental resource use will come back down, but then are they going to be in a 1990s situation in the year 2050 where, they're still doing CO2 emissions? Meanwhile, will half of the world start to move on to kinds of renewable resources and solar energy? I mean, are we really thinking long term here for all of us? Is there are we using the best available technology, or what are we really doing?
And an important part on that is the part which I thought was interesting. I mean, the way Kari laid it out is global information on solutions seems like a good thing, right? Get all the knowledge of the world and apply it, and pick the best parts of it to apply locally. That seemed, when Kari laid it out, seemed good. And then I forget who it was. I think Eli or somebody was saying, well, yeah, but we don't. What the World Bank does not do well is local solutions. They come and tell you how it's done, right? And in some sense, I mean, for me, sort of one of the big downsides of globalization is homogenization, right? The notion that ideas, that every time we lose a language, or a culture, we lose a source of new ideas, and it's the equivalent of, it's the kind of human and the anthropological equivalent of biodiversity, right? That we want lots of ideas out there because our survival as a species depends on being able to generate a lot of ideas. And as soon as everybody thinks that the best way to feed the body is by eating McDonald's, which actually may be good, right? Except what's the problem when everybody is surviving completely on McDonald's? Then when a shock comes to the system, right, and all of our, systems have adopted to only being able to eat McDonald's, we don't know how to go back to eating lettuce and, and green things and stuff like that, right? I mean, that you have this, that the system socially is more vulnerable, the fewer ideas there are, which are the equivalent of mutations in the gene pool, right? You want to have You want to have mutants coming up into the system regularly in the gene pool in order that when a shock comes, those mutants can then stop propagating themselves in this new ecological niche, right? Most of those genes will die off. Those mutants will die off because they don't work well in this ecological niche. But as soon as the ecological niche changes, those mutants then propagate themselves and fill the niche, and adapt better. We want the same thing with ideas. And I think and that works both sides of this equation, right? One is you do want a lot of ideas, but you have to have access to them. So if you're in an area where you didn't devise photovoltaics, it's nice to be able to go externally and say, show us how photovoltaics work, right? To have access to all the ideas, you want access to a lot of ideas, but those ideas have to be heterogeneous, right? They have to be different. So I think there's kind of some trade-offs here. Malika.
Oh, like memes. I mean, genes memes sort of analogy.
No,
okay.
I don't. Another time.
But memes are ideas, and they replicate like genes.
Okay.
The other thing I'd really like you to say something about is like why the World Bank functions the way it does, like how it's hijacked sort of by U.S. and West European interests.
But I think that's the wrong analogy, though. Yes, it's true, but it's not hijacked. They're the pilots. In other words, if we think about hijacking is somebody who's not supposed to be on the plane, gets on the plane and takes it somewhere it's not. No. The U.S. and all the governments who run it, they're the pilots. They built the plane, right? And they're flying it where they want to go. And the question is, can you negotiate with them as passengers, in a sense, right? Can you negotiate with them about saying, we want to go in a different way, and we want more than just pretzels on this flight, We want actually extra leg room, and we want to be able to talk on our cell phones during takeoff, etc. But in a sense, it is important to realize, and I think to go back to this sense of, first of all, the World Bank's mandate is development. It was set up to be a development organization. It's doing that job. Now, we might also, as development people, say it's even doing that job badly. But in some sense, it's to say, not fair to judge us. They have decided to accept the notion that they should also be judged environmentally, But they also can say, yeah, we're trying to be, a straight A student at Stanford, and we're going to try to learn to play tennis a little bit better. We're going to try to do two things well, but tennis is secondary. And I think the World Bank is generally, as an organization, going to say development is our primary goal. If we can not do no harm to the environment, that's a good thing. But our goal is not environmental protection. We're not, the World Environmental Protection Organization. That's not our job. And the second is to say, even if that's not the mandate, even if the mandate changes, it's also to say no. Go back to basic notions in IR about how do institutions get created, what do they reflect? Power and interest. And the World Bank is a classic case, right? Votes in the World Bank are based on what? Contributions, how much you pay. And in a sense, whether that's right or wrong, there ain't no other option, right? That is, if you have another one where it's one country, one vote, what happens to contributions? Right? It's sort of, and there's some sense of, I don't know about fairness or equity. It'd be nice if people just gave, if the rich just started giving away their money to poor people with no strings attached. But given that one option is the rich not giving away their money, the other option, which is not an option, is the rich giving it away with no strings attached. The only real option is the rich giving it and getting what they want in exchange. It's an exchange relationship. It's not a grant. It's not a gift. It may be a little bit altruistic. They may be giving more than they're getting in return. They may not. You can go, argue about that. But I think the question is that it's not going to change. The World Bank is not being hijacked by the powerful. They set it up to do a certain thing. And indeed, one could argue that the environmentalists have hijacked it, right? They weren't invited on this flight. They've gotten on board. But they said, okay, you can stay on board and we'll try to fly where you want to go too, right? So I think just kind of keep that in view about what's the mandate and then what's possible. And then I think, okay, let's say they did want to do environment. And I think, a lot of the came out in the debate, this notion of, well, paper's not equal to practice, that, show us the money, right? You got all these nice institutional changes, but on the ground, are things getting better than they used to be? And I think this is a standard institutional response. We've been bad up till now, but we're really going to be better in the future, right? You can always say that, right? Every report card you take home to your parents in high school, you say, yeah, I'm going to get A's next term, right? So don't beat me up even though I got C's this past term, right? You're always going to get better in the future. And the question is at some point there is a sense of show us the money, right? Show us that, in fact, you said you were going to get better in 1995. It's now 2000. Did you get better? What's the evidence that you're doing a better job of protecting the environment? And I think the World Bank can make a case for that. How strong a case that environment is more involved, that there are environmental impact assessments as part of the process. The question is, what do they end up doing on the ground? I think that's a question that there are studies that have been done, and they come down on different sides of this. And again, I think one way to make sense of that is when you say, you see reports that say World Bank sucks, World Bank's great, is always to think of it. I think the best way to make sense of it is in this counterfactual versus goal achievement, that you can say, hey, it's better than it would have been if they hadn't been working the issue, working the problem, and it's not as good as we would like it to be, and that helps you make sense of these two kind of competing things. If we think that the problems with the World Bank are not inherent, but they're fixable, right? That you could organize the World Bank how many people think it's inherent, that you can't fix the World Bank, that the World Bank is the way it is, and given that it's controlled by the donors, and that their main goals are probably not environmental, at least not yet, that the World Bank won't change? How many people, raise your hands high enough so I can get a sense. Okay, so most people think, or 5 people think, and the rest of you think, no, you could probably fix it. Whether you make it perfect is obviously another question, but make it so it does a better job, that there's changes you can make that make it worth doing. Okay, it's just interesting to think about those sorts of questions. And I think that then should make you think about, let's talk, all this talk about greening the GATT. And the two options, greening the GATT, now the WTO, right? Which of the two options do you want? The World Trade Organization having environment as part of its mandate, that's one option, right? Or do you want the World Trade Organization and the WEO, right, the World Environment Organization, as an alternative that gets these 374, or whatever the number is, environmental agreements all together under one roof, nice big bureaucracy, grind slowly but extremely fine, that kind of big, huge bureaucracy. And benefits are make trade-offs, make connections, make linkages, not have, the kinds of standard, oh, great, I know what we do. We, solve the acid rain problem by making smokestacks. Well, that doesn't solve the acid rain problem. It makes a landfill problem, right? Because you get all the stuff that's the smokestack is catching, and you got to clean out the filters every once in a while. Where do they end up? In some ground, in some landfill where they leach into the water system, kill the water, whatever. That these kinds of ends of pipe solutions that you're not doing cross-media analysis, right? To say how do we actually reduce the amount of pollutants of all sorts? Maybe making some connections across agreements to realize that the Biodiversity Convention should be probably talking to the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, et cetera. And some of those connections are being made. In that case, biodiversity and Ramsar, and forest deforestation and desertification are those kind of ecosystemic treaties are working together now. But the question is, could we do better? And I think that's something just to think about is kind of the institutional dynamics of having a big organization that has a certain mandate. Do you want to add to its mandate or create a kind of balancing one? I think, and that's a growing debate about what we want to do environmentally at a global level.
Something besides the issue of the environment, where there was an example of an organization trying to add a component in versus a separate international regime being created? I don't know.
I don't know, but it's a good question to say, kind of, and even to say at a domestic, at a kind of more organizational level generally, can you generally change the mandate of an organization so that it becomes different, or is it always better to add, And one place you could imagine looking at this is, let's say, in a lot of, actually in European states, I think it's pretty common that when you have a new government, they tend to change around the ministries, so that agriculture, which is under, one government, under the Ministry of Commerce, goes under Ministry of Environment under some other one, so that and to see on average how do those things work. So I don't know that stuff, but it's sort of worth asking. I think The one other issue is, I think, and this is the thing that comes from the Friends of the Earth piece, the structural adjustment, right, piece, is a thing about, they certainly believe you can fix the World Bank. You can do good things. And I think that's also the case in the Dubois and Seymour. They make it actually in a little bit, I think, more sophisticated version, which is intentional use of the adjustment instrument to promote structural reform to meet environmental objectives. You do have power. The World Bank does have power. Use it, right? And say, hey, here are the conditions. You have to deregulate except in terms of environmental protection. And there you have to get the government more involved in the market, right? You have to not just remove the government from the market, but remove it where it's imposing bad things environmentally and impose it to internalize externalities, to get rid of environmental problems, to kind of make it look more like countries that have tried to deal with environmental, to have an industrial base that's more environmentally sound. So I think they're saying the World Bank does have power, make use of it. And you can add kind of green conditionality to all of your loans. And then I think that the next step is also, and then make sure you follow through on it.